Association of Near-Death Studies of Charlotte chapter. Yay! And, you know, technical issues, but at the same time, what about the beauty of technology that we can do this? Nino! Okay. Oh, look, now look at Mark being bossy. Okay. So we have this is our Charlotte group, and we already have our speaker on standby. Now, I want to jump right in with our speaker today, and I feel like that, first of all, I'm totally impressed that I have Tricia here, and see, I have your book. I mean, she has been working her tail off promoting this book, okay? So I want you guys to all buy her book, Angels in the OR. I'm plugging you right now. And she has been working on this, and she'll tell you how long. But Tricia, I found, is a real person. And, I mean, not that you wouldn't be, but you're down to earth. She's from Texas, so she's down to earth, okay? But she's been working years on this. This didn't happen overnight. She did not happen overnight. And she has had multiple spiritual experiences and traumatic experiences. I don't know how much she wants to get into. It's up to her discretion, but her book does cover it all, and I will be giving you a video testimony once I complete everything. It will be very glowing. But she has worked very hard on this. She was on Dr. Oz, I think mid-February, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay, mid-February. And I wanted to hear more from you, not to say the other person wasn't okay, but I want to hear more from her and her experience, but at least it gave her some visibility. So she will be talking about some of her experiences, and, you know, it might even be helpful to talk about kind of your background. I know that she's a professor, and a little bit about her, but after setting up the meetings, and we just kind of connected, and I actually consider her a friend. She's a lovely lady, and I'm just incredibly proud of her. And thank you for speaking to our little group, and I'm going to give you the floor. This is Tricia Barker.
Hey. So nice to meet everyone here. And how many of you have seen my YouTube channel and maybe seen my near-death experience already? Has anyone checked it out? One of you. Okay. So I hope you don't mind. I love to just tell the near-death experience story. I think that that's the most important thing to do, is really to share these stories of the light and the afterlife. And I call it angels in heaven and God as well. You know, I struggled as an agnostic in the beginning. Someone let me know, a researcher, that when I first started talking about my near-death experience, I called the beings that I saw beings, and then I called them higher beings, and then I called them light beings, and eventually messengers of God. And then I was like, okay, they're angels. You know, like, you know, you have to come with language to this way of connecting with people. So I'm going to set the scene and explain who I was before my near-death experience, and how dramatic these experiences can be, and how life-changing they can be. Does anyone have children who were in college, or have kids who are in college at this time? A couple of you. Yeah, so they can be a mess, can't they? They can be really, they can be quite a challenge at that age, because they're figuring out their lives, they're trying to, and that's who I was. I was an ordinary college student, about to graduate, pretty materialistic, pretty judgmental. I went around in my head thinking, you know, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be rich. I grew up poor. You know, this was my focus. This was the 90s. So I was very style conscious and fashion conscious and music conscious. And, you know, these things mattered to me, as a lot of young people, you know, think about life. That I was pretty superficial, basically, and didn't care much for religion. I grew up in a home where my mom was pretty emotionally abusive, and I associated religion with her, and I was just done with it. I preferred education, and that was that. And when I was on my way to run the Austin 10K, I hit another car at about 60 miles an hour. I was falling asleep at the wheel, perhaps, but he must have gunned it in his intersection as well, and we hit each other, not full-on head-on collision, but basically at this angle. and he was in a very large SUV. I was in a Honda Civic, and that car crunched up really quickly. My knee was bleeding, my ankle was bleeding, but I knew something was really wrong when I reached for the glove compartment to get my license and insurance, and I couldn't reach it. I was slumped over to one side, and I couldn't right myself. My back, I later found out, was the spine was crushed, and several vertebrae in the mid-back were just compressed. And so I was slumped over like this. And I knew that something was different, you know, that my life was out of my hands. And I hadn't prayed in a very long time, but I gave, you know, one of those foxhole prayers, or those you're in the gutter and you're looking up. And I said, God, if there is a God, come on, help me. I don't want to be in a wheelchair. I want to walk. I don't want this, you know, this is horrible. And 17 hours later, I'll compress all that, but I waited a long time. Austin, I later found out, has so many people. They have close to 80,000 students now. They had about 50,000 students at that time. So neurosurgeons were just on duty all the time. They couldn't get to all the accidents. People were bungee jumping and breaking their backs. You know, the kids were wild in that town. And so there were a lot of accidents. So I waited 17 hours for surgery. I didn't have health insurance. One man refused to work on me. I overheard a neurosurgeon on the phone with one of the nurses. And eventually I found a neurosurgeon who had been off duty for a long time. She said, I'm going to work on you. She took me into surgery after she went home and got a bite to eat and rested. And I remember thinking, when they put that anesthesia over me, I signed a form. It said 17% chance of death. I remember thinking, well, that's a little higher than I kind of hoped for. I was hoping 5, like 17. All right. And I thought, that's it. I'll be out of this surgery. I don't know how long they had been at work on my back, but I know that I was turned over. And when I popped out of my body, I saw my body, and it was very bloody. Surgery was way more brutal. I remember thinking, this reminds me of like World War I or Civil War days or something. There's just so much blood. It looks so gruesome. I didn't know that modern surgery would look this horrible, but there was blood on the sheet and blood everywhere, blood on their hands. And I popped up, and I didn't care about the body. That was the first thing that hit me. I was so excited as this agnostic, and I really feared death before this moment. I thought maybe we just go into the ground and we kind of merge with the ground, and there's this oneness. I didn't think that I'd retain my consciousness, but I was 100% certain that I retained my consciousness and that I was me. And that was so exciting. I mean, I can't tell you how excited I was to know that I go on, you go on, we all go on. So just that first moment gave me such joy. But then I remember looking, and I saw these angels. And as I said before, I called them light beings before, but they were shocking. And if you haven't seen angels, I can only say that these guardian angels are so massive. They're so tall. They're so powerful. They're so intelligent. They communicate with this light through their eyes. That's like telepathy. So it's not communication like this. It's this wave of energy that makes you feel at peace, calm. There's a lot of intelligence that comes through their eyes. And I knew that they had been in this environment. So I call it, this spiritual environment, way longer than me. So they knew more about what was going on. And I ended up titling the book Angels in the OR because that first scene was so powerful. I mean, that was enough for me to go, okay, I understand, there's so much more to this world than we could ever imagine. It was so mysterious and so amazing. Paintings can't capture angels. That experience was amazing. But they said one thing to me that shocked me. They said, watch this. And they sent this wave of energy and light through the back of my surgeons and into their hands, and it lit up my entire body. And I knew that this meant that the bone fragments would be picked out of my spine, that I'd walk, that I'd be fine, that they were in control of this. And I thought, how very strange. Angels work through people. And I wondered if the doctors knew this, if the surgeons knew this. I hadn't technically died at that time. So right after they did this, the monitor flatlined. And I remember that sound, and I remember thinking, ooh, I know that from TV shows. That means I'm dead. What are they going to do to revive me? I don't know. I'm out of here. And so as a spirit form, you can just think and go. So I went through the wall, and then I was out in the corridor, and I saw my stepdad, who was getting a candy bar out of a vending machine. And this is why National Geographic and Dr. Oz and different places have studied my story, because researchers love verifiable facts outside of form, because in a sense, that proves that consciousness survives the body. And I later verified that my stepdad did come back into the room where my mom and dad were waiting. And my mom had married him while I was in college, so I didn't know him very well. And I remember looking at him, and already I was detached from my body and my form. And I thought, if I die, hope he's good to her, hope they have a good life. That was about as far as I got with it, but I was free. And I looked at him later. My mom said that my dad and her were on their knees crying and praying, because they had this spiritual feeling, this belief that I had died. And they knew that I had died because they were praying at the very moment that I had died. And my stepdad came back in with the candy bar, said, hey, lighten up in here. Anyone want a bite of Snickers? And so they laughed and, got up and had a bite of the Snickers and continued to wait. So after that, I left the hospital, and I was floating above Austin. And for a minute, I felt this oneness with everyone in my town. And I felt this great love for people that I had known. I realized that when you're going, all little personality conflicts, everything that seemed so major in form was just love. You just wished everyone well, and wished that they had a good life, and wished that, they were happy. That at the core, that's what we are, is just love. And when we disconnect from this story and this person, we realize that. And you see that when people are dying on their deathbeds. I was talking with Lisa Smarts the other day, and she was saying how very rarely do people, when they are dying, ever say, oh, you and your father, you always made me so angry. Usually, they come out of those moments right before death and go, you know what, I love you. Have a great life. I never told you how wonderful you are. And that's generally the place that we're at. So I felt that oneness and that beauty and that love with anyone I'd met, anyone I had just walked by on the sidewalk. And then I felt this transition happening, and I felt this light. It was like a thread of light, but it was a consciousness, and I knew that God consciousness was coming for me. And I relaxed into it, and it seemed as if I transformed into this place, which was like a galaxy full of stars, just kind of a beautiful place. And I felt the intelligence of God, kind of like that intelligence that was coming through the eyes of the angels. God came through like this light and lit up my life. And I knew this was the life review. I'd heard about near-death experiences before I had mine. And so there was this moment where I thought, this is going to be interesting. I'm about to see my life. I was only 22, so I hadn't, and honestly, I was kind of a nerdy kid. I just studied a lot and had kind of a tough upbringing. So I read a lot of books. I hadn't harmed a lot of people, so I didn't have to relive any great harm that I had caused people. But like I said earlier, I was a little judgmental and a little closed off. And so what God showed me was all these beautiful, wonderful people were around me in college, and I didn't take the time to know them. And some of them actually prayed for me because they thought I seemed depressed or sad. And I was so humbled and so shocked that these beautiful people were all around me. And because they didn't wear the right shoes or they didn't have the right clothes or whatever, I didn't connect with them. And I realized that I needed to look into the hearts of people. And that was the first lesson that I think God was showing me, is look into the hearts, look into the souls. Don't look at the outward appearances of people. Look at who they are. And that really hit me. Then God took me back to childhood, and I had a lot of faith as a child. I loved Jesus. I prayed. I'd go out to nature. I'd sit under a tree, and I would just commune, with nature and with my prayer. And God showed me that was a beautiful time in my life, and that's where I should be more often. That great healing can come from communing in that way and really being at peace and being in that state of faith. And so from that moment, I heard different words like love is all that matters, be like a little child, remind them to go to nature. And there was a lot of love and intelligence that was beginning to flow to me. But those were statements, and it's hard to describe how the words looked, but it was almost like the booming voice of God slowed down for a minute, and I almost saw it like written in the sky so that I'd never forget it. Be like a little child. And then it, like sunk into my soul, love is all that matters. And it became a part of me. Remind them to go to nature. And those messages were important, I knew. And that be like a little child was especially important. And it is biblical. And so my spirit form decided to actually be like a little child in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I did that. So my spirit form was like 22 and it became like 5. And then I entered heaven, and heaven was beautiful. It was full of this green grass, and the grass was so like Kentucky grass is the closest I can describe it. It just was emerald bright and green and beautiful and swaying, and every piece of grass looked like it was alive, like it was going back and forth and just swaying, like it had intelligence. There was nothing wrong with it. The sky was beautiful. The grass went on. And then the only person that I knew at that time who was dead was my grandfather. And he was a very loving guy. And I was the last person to see him before he died. And he had one of those lucid moments. And he stood up and waved to me. And he was like, "Goodbye, Tricia." And then when we came back from lunch, he was dead. From leukemia. And I was 10 at that time, but he was connected to me through faith. So again, that kind of rough childhood, my dad's side of the family was the very loving side. My mom's side was the very judgmental side. And I loved my grandfather and grandmother very much. And he tried to make me remember him. So he gave me on my 10th birthday, $10 for every year of my life. Well, I had just prayed to God before he died that if God was real, give me $100. And I told no one. And my grandfather, gave me this $100. So he's been connected to me through faith in so many ways. And he was there in heaven. And I didn't recognize him at first because I had changed my form to this little kid. He was quite old when he died and had leukemia and just, I didn't even know what he looked like when he was young, but he looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. And he had this strong jaw and, a beautiful head of hair. And I didn't recognize him. I just thought he looks familiar. And then he showed me this vehicle, which he had left our parents. It was this old Chevy truck. And I thought, okay. And he said, "Hey, jump on the truck." And since I did this as a kid, I jumped on the back of his truck and he drove me through heaven, and my feet were dragging that green grass, and I felt just at peace and happy. And just like I was held and loved and safe. But then he turned to me and he said, "Tricia, do you want to keep going?" And he pointed out the love of God and this light of God that was up kind of in the right-hand corner. And I thought, yes, oh my God, yes, I definitely want to go there. So my spirit form took off and I started flying toward God. Well, at that moment, I felt people's prayers. And I hope that this comforts anyone who's ever lost anyone and prayed in the moments that they not die, because I felt the prayers of other people. I heard every word that people were saying. And even if I had not come back, I would have felt their love. And my soul soaked it up. I nodded to them, but there was God over there. And I thought, I don't care, how intense your prayer is. I want to go there. I want to go where God is. And one aunt had lost her daughter in a car wreck. And so she was begging God that my mother not have to go through that. But it didn't matter to me. I broke through their prayers, kind of like their prayers were this strong wind that was trying to keep me back. And I just broke through. It was like, I'm going to God. And as I got closer to God, I felt so much better than I'd ever felt before. I just felt peace and love and great harmony, and like everything was right. Nothing was wrong. I don't know if you feel this way in your body, but generally there's a little pain or there's a little uncomfortableness or you're worried about what you're going to do later. We're never just totally blissed out, totally to a 1/1,000,000th degree. That's what I felt in the presence of God. I felt so loved, so taken care of. And it was like an atomic bomb of love. It just was so enormous. I couldn't contain it all. And for the first time, I was safe to love God too. And that's a beautiful feeling, because not only do we want to be loved, we want to love 100%. And I knew that God was safe. I could love with everything I was. And so that exchange was so beautiful. Never wanted to leave it, wanted to know more, wanted to go to the other side of whatever this was. But I was stopped. So I was getting closer and closer to that light. And at some point there was like a barrier. Many near-death experiencers talk about this barrier. Sometimes it happens earlier. So I don't understand why some experiences you get all the way to God and then there's a barrier. Other times people just see their ancestors and then there's a barrier that they shouldn't go through. But there was mine. And it was like I just hit a wall. And God said, look down. You have to go back and you have to remind them to turn on their lights and be connected to me. And I knew some things you just know without the words being said. This wasn't at the time. This was not, I needed to be a spiritual teacher. This was, I needed to be an actual teacher and go into school districts and remind all these students, college students. It started with junior high students, high school students. Now I teach college students to be alive and to be open to God and to be open to healing and to bring that love into their lives, to heal, to do a lot, to not be surrounded by fear. So there were other souls that were encased by fear. And I saw that as just darkness. And I thought, oh, but the light can break through that and they can be full of light. They can be full of love and just go out into this world and do good things in this world. So I realized that, but I also didn't like it because I was still me. And I said, wait a second. I was supposed to go to law school. I was supposed to do other things. I grew up poor. I don't necessarily want to be a teacher. And God laughed at me. So, my soul was rebellious enough to argue with God there for a moment, as if God didn't know what was going to be right for me. And I felt like I was just sent, like I was kicked or, kicked out of heaven, I say, and back into my body. And it felt like this dark wind just covered me. And suddenly I was back in form, and it wasn't an easy feeling because I felt still connected to that intelligence. In fact, I talk about this, but when they asked me my name, when the tracheotomy was out and I was able to talk, they said, what's your name? You have to do that after surgery. And I said, yeah, her name is Tricia. I remember her. And they were like, no, you are her. And I was like, do I really have to be her? It just seems so annoying to have to be me, like that. I knew I was coming back to my consciousness, my level of intelligence, my emotional wounds. And I just wanted to be out there with God. I wanted to be somewhere else. I didn't want to have to come back to this individual life and live it out. And yet there I was. And I knew from the moment out of surgery that I'd had this experience. What I didn't know is how profoundly it would continue to change me. In fact, I was scared those first moments in the hospital that I would lose that powerful feeling. And they were giving me a lot of morphine and, I was in a lot of pain. So I asked to write down what I could, and I wrote down what I remembered about the angels. And I was in so much pain that I could barely keep the pen on the paper, but I wrote down what the angels look like, how they communicated with their eyes, and then I had a long recovery. I was in a body cast in Texas. And if you can imagine that, I'm sure it gets hot and muggy there, but can you imagine a summer in a body cast and learning to walk again? And I got up at 6 a.m. and, when I was in that space and tried to learn to walk. And what I found was that I was totally different. I was not the same person. In fact, everything about my brain was different. The way I thought was profoundly different. So one thing that immediately changed is as soon as I got home from the hospital, I didn't take painkillers. And in retrospect, that was a good thing because I know a lot of people can get addicted to those painkillers. But what I did was I learned to leave my body through meditation. And I would imagine the angels working on my back, and I would imagine that God's healing power was coming through my body and helping my bones heal. And I wouldn't even feel the pain. I just kind of go into meditation and send this healing light through my body. And it was something I just do. If I couldn't sleep, if I was in great pain, that's where I'd go. And I started meditating and praying and really believing that I had this mission, that any pain that I had been through in childhood, I thought, surely there's all these kids out in public schools who, even if they've had a great parent, one that supported them all the way, they're still missing something, another perspective or a little encouragement in this other area. Maybe their dad wanted them to be an engineer, but they love music. And, so, there's always a way that kids are open to being supported in some way, to being loved. And I thought, that's my mission. I'm just there to love them in the ways that they're broken and support them in the ways that maybe they need to do more in this world and be more in this world. And it became evident really quickly that I was to do this. What I didn't understand, and I think, Tamara, you wanted me to talk a little bit about this, was the after effects. And the after effects can be shocking. So I would know certain things, and I'd never had any psychic ability or any of these abilities before. And I just called it, well, I crossed the veil. I went to the other side. I died. So now I just know things and it doesn't matter. And I just pushed it aside. But one thing that I would know, and this was just little psychic moments, I would know what song was on the radio before I turned it on. So I would start singing it, I'd turn on the radio, and then that song would be on. Like I could almost hear it before the radio was on. Just weird things like that. And it made me realize, oh, there's a consciousness that's still blending with things, outside of me that I don't even understand. But one thing about dying and near-death experiences is you have a little bit of PTSD too, because it is traumatic. Like that, I had a car wreck and I was in surgery. So I would, if I saw anything about surgery or hospitals, ER was on television at that time, I thought, no, you can't watch that, because I would have these out-of-body experiences where I'd see a stretcher going into a hospital, and then suddenly I was, out of my body, up on the ceiling, and I thought, wow, this is weird. And the way I just categorized it is, well, my spirit's loosened. I guess it's not fully used to being back in my body, so it can leave pretty easily. I knew it could through meditation. I knew it could through lucid dreaming. And if you ever encounter someone who's had a near-death experience, I would definitely encourage them to open up in different ways, because I think those first few years after a near-death experience, you do have new abilities. You do have a greater knowledge of what has happened to you. And that is a great time to begin a meditation practice and really look at healing the body, at going to church, at going to spiritual events. Like these were amazing moments for me. Before, it was all kind of intellectual. If I sat in church, my heart might be moved by a good experience. But after that near-death experience, I would start bawling. If I felt the love, I'd want to just stand up and dance around. And, I would feel so much spiritual joy that I was really kind of odd after my near-death experience. There weren't a lot of places that fully embraced that type of way of being. How much time do I have, Tamara? I definitely want to leave time for questions.
We have, you can't see my head, but I'm here. It's my head talking. We have, it is 12:15, so we've got it set to 1, so you can just
okay, awesome.
On. And I want to talk about, if you can, I'm just loving this. I'm loving it. You're just sharing from your heart, and this is a really, I don't know if you know this is a really nice group of people. Everybody here is pretty special and very unique. They're just, I would say it's a very open, loving group. So you're in a safe place here, but whatever you feel led to say. But I would like for you to talk about, I love how you said how you were before and then how you were afterwards. And maybe even touch on the after effects and also touch on, you've had other spiritually transformative experiences along the way that might have to be considered. Sometimes the near-death is really darn close to out-of-body or spiritually transformative. And we don't really talk about that enough because, one thing is being empty, or some of us in here going, yeah, yeah. I don't want to sell this whole near-death thing because we're going to all be like drinking Kool-Aid because I saw the graphs too and all that. And it's like the love is like, well, like
yes.
Could you start us out by saying that's all started, and then you tell me your thoughts, and then go with the after effects and other
Yes.
One of the things that I would like to mention for me that I have moments of. It's not that I don't feel so blessed. It's not that I don't. Oh, you can't see my head. Here I am. It's not that I don't care about this life. It's not that I don't love my husband. He's wonderful. Here he is. Right. And I'm blessed. Jesus actually told me I had someone for you because it was such a horrible life in area. And boy, did he do me right. Forgetting harmony, go to Jesus. But I have moments of sadness being here, because I miss it there. And I hate to tell people that because it makes me feel like I'm betraying people, but I have moments of deep sadness.
Oh,
yeah. Love it. And other people here that indeed do understand that? Do you understand the deep love? Okay, here we go.
Yes, I will.
Look, she's got a great partner over here, but it's not about that. I mean,
yeah.
Deep.
I can definitely talk to that, Tamara. That's a really great point. And after interviewing so many near-death experiencers, I know that many of us long for God because that God's love was perfect. It was beautiful. It just blew me up with love. And people can be really disappointing, like in the workplace and life, like they can really not be loving. They can be the opposite of love. And when you're this loving soul and you encounter them, it can be very discouraging. So in my book, I write about a lot of, teachers who were my supervising teachers who were competitive with me, who were horrible to me. So, here I was in this, trying to just be this agent of love. And, the world is full of lost people and dangerous people too. At 22, one part of my story is that, if you're wide open with love and you just want to hug everyone and, just be this loving force, it can be misunderstood. And I attracted the attention of a stalker who still to this day stalks me, and that's not talked about enough, I think, as far as, the dangerous parts of that. Just because, there are sick people in this world and they need a lot of healing. And that element of my story is sad, but I tried to use everything that happened to me to help other people. So I thought, okay, yes, this world, some people say it's a fallen world, and, in some ways that makes sense, but we are here to bring that love. And I thought, okay, in every situation, that's what I've got to do. I've got to transform it. I may not be working, obviously with that stalker, but I'm helping other people who've been stalked. I'm helping other people take note of it, alert authorities. I've also just felt like I miss God so much. And it's only been the last 10 years that I've really learned how to go and just fully connect with God again. And my mission is to bring that heaven to earth. And so I'll go somewhere and I'm like, okay, remove all that darkness from other people, remove all that pain, and just be in my life 100% God, and help me bring heaven to earth. And I will feel that happen.
Can I interject real quick?
Yes.
Okay, because, I'm going to, if you don't mind, we had a little fun. I won't go into too much. We had a little phone conversation, and we, when you have, well, look, we all have abilities if we connect to God as the source of all, right? If we connect our soul, and it opens up so much, that we can normally not do, right? It's our soul blending with God's soul. So we were on the phone, and we did some spiritual work, right? I'm just going to say, she helped my dad cross. He was a ghost for 4 years. So Tricia helped my dad cross, and I don't know, you were his type in life. So I think that was the reason. I'm not kidding, because the woman was it. So really, he was like, well, okay, you can't get boomer than us. So you can do that. I've been begging every medium and everybody, but he liked Tricia real good. So, but one of the things I was thinking, you're talking about bringing the light, that's also, I'm sure, my mission too, and that's pretty much so. It sounds so simple, was actually asked to do that. And I was told I would not be alone. There'd be other people doing the same thing. I was like, well, okay, then I was arguing with Jesus. But why can't we right now visualize that bright light? We've got the time, and let's bring it. I mean, when you know what I'm saying? Where we can visualize that bright light. Everybody close their eyes, and Tricia and I can bring it right now, and you can actually feel that. You want to feel that? You want to do it? Is that too much to ask?
No, that's awesome. Let's do it.
You know, we feel the same way. Do you want to lead us into it, or you?
Yeah, I'll say a little prayer, and we'll do that, because I think
tandem together, and then let's. Why don't you get everyone relaxed, and then we'll kind of just tandem. We'll just kind of just do this.
Okay, sounds good.
How to do it? And
yes. The most important thing is to completely relax your body and let go of your story, your mind, and really just imagine that you're a receptor. You might start at the top of your head, and you might just go, all that love, all that joy, all that peace, just let it flow through every cell of my body. And dear God, dear Jesus, dear divine source, please just come into the minds and hearts and souls and bodies of everyone here. Let us feel your presence as an energy that is greatly healing, greatly loving, that every part of everyone is so deeply loved. If there's a particular part of yourself that feels pain, your heart, you might put your hand on your heart and let that love really flow even more powerfully into that area, because anything that is sick, anything that is damaged, it needs more love in order to access the wholeness and healed part of it that it is. So just let God flow into every cell of your body.
One thing I want to mention now is breathing is so important. Is to breathe in slowly through your mouth, through your nose, and exhale through your mouth. And just realize that breath is a gift of God, and that any day that we can have that life taken away, or we could be given that. It's a beautiful thing, and we should honor that breath. So as we breathe in through our nose, and exhale slowly. You can breathe in. I like to breathe in. I like to visualize myself. This beautiful bright light. It's so bright. It's so warm. It's so embracing, and it comes from the top of my head. I like to think of the heavens above me. Of course, it's not really like that, but I choose to think that. I look at it visually above my head. This beautiful bright light. It's just all-encompassing love coming from the top of my head, and as I breathe in through my nose and exhale through my mouth. I'm just excelling, letting go any of the things I said, what people said to me, whether it's now or in the past, any heartache or turmoil. I breathe in the light of God. It's this beautiful golden white light. It's abundant and loving. And then I breathe out anything that I don't need anymore, any baggage, any unwanted thoughts of mine or somebody else's. And as I breathe in and exhale out, now this works once it's like letting out, and now it's lighter. And as I breathe in the top of my head, it starts moving. It starts moving at the top of my head. As some people call it chakra, it moves into the top. And as I breathe, and it goes down to my face, my sinuses. I'm feeling my body being healed. And as I breathe in and exhale, it's going through my neck. It's beautiful healing, all encompassing, perfect, nothing but love. There's a light, power, the power of light. And as you breathe in and exhale out, melt in the core of your chest. And letting go of whatever's holding you back, especially in the heart and the emotion and love. And it goes down to the top of your shoulders, this beautiful light light, down through your elbows, arms, down through your fingers. Letting go of being stuck energy. Just let it flow through. Breathe in and release exhale. Knowing that you're loved. There is nothing that you can do wrong in the eyes of God. You are perfect just the way you are.
And as you breathe into this bright light and exhale out, you're actually exhaling out beautiful, gold, sparkling white light under now, moving down through your chest, down through your abdomen, your belly, as you keep breathing, and through your hips, down through the lower part of your hips, even your growing area, and reproduction issues, whatever it may be, prostrate. Visualize being healed and purified as you breathe in and exhale out. It goes down to the top of your thighs, your legs, down to your knees, down through your legs, down through your feet, and now it goes down through, I like to say, Mother Earth. I like to visualize beautiful white flowers flowing within my legs. To show I'm one with everything. And as I breathe in and exhale out, I'm vibrating at a higher frequency. And this golden white light is surrounding me and bigger. And now I look at myself from above as I'm breathing in and breathing out. And I see myself from a different perspective. I see this golden white light bigger and bigger and nothing but love. And then I ask the archangels to draw close and to feel the mighty presence, and they are always, always with us, and that we are all so connected to love. And one of the things I'd like to personally do is I have my light angel, and there's two of you wish to put your hand on your right shoulder. Some of you may feel something, some of you may feel tingling, and I ask the archangels to draw close and closer. And I ask peace, the peace of God, the Holy Spirit, be with everyone. And we just breathe in, and exhale 3 at a time, and rejoin again.
Beautiful. And as you come out of this, I just want you to feel like cleansed, like almost as if you were new, like that little child that God told me to be, just, you know, your pure essence, that anything that you've held back or suppressed, you know, that you feel free to just say, you feel free to just be yourself, your creative, wonderful self, because you're loved. Oh.
Okay, everybody. Does it feel peaceful in here? Is it just me, or does it feel peaceful in here? You feel the shift? I would love that.
Oh, I love that.
Michelle, how do you feel in your end?
I felt this is, I'm just going to say it and we'll talk about it now or later, but I was really sending some energy to someone's throat area, you know, like what would be the throat chakra, which is sometimes about accessing voice or finding the right words to express your emotions, or really looking for a way to be expressive in the way that you want to in this world. And I don't know if anyone's working on that issue, but just expressing your truth and feeling safe to express that. I felt like someone needed that in their life. And that was one thing that I was sending. But I do feel people energetically. And that's one thing that's very different. So there were a lot of, I'll go over some spiritual changes. Then I really want to talk with you as a group. But from the beginning, I felt my students, and I walked into the classroom, and it was always a sacred and beautiful thing. I would pray to God, and I would say, all right, angels, if you want to work through me, go ahead. And I would start talking, and sometimes I wouldn't remember what I said, and a student would come hug me after class, and she'd just be bawling and tell me what was going on in her life, and I'd be able to help her. And I thought, I don't even know what I said. Like, this is weird. Okay. And there were lots of moments like that where I just trusted that I was meant to give these messages to students. I was meant to be there for them, to guide them in a real way, but in an intuitive way too, and to just trust that it was safe and it was fine. So a little bit about some of these spiritually transformative experiences. I do want to zap ahead to the one that occurred about 10 years ago. So I was doing pretty well. I was teaching. I struggled in romantic relationships, and I struggled in certain areas of my life. But I went into this cathedral because I was beginning to develop pain in my neck from that back surgery. And I asked for healing from God. Well, what I saw in that cathedral was Jesus. And I did not expect that. I was expecting to see, to just be healed, for my neck to be healed, for an angel to heal me, or for God, but Jesus was human. And I saw an actual visual of Jesus, and all the wounds that I had from childhood from my mom just came out, and I was just bawling in that cathedral. And I felt Jesus hug the child that I once was, and was like, "You're fine. I had you the whole time. I was hugging you. It's okay. I'm not her. I'm not anyone who harmed you. I'm me, and I love you." And I can't tell you, like, all the rebelliousness of my youth, all the pain, it just left me in this real way, and real healing began to happen. So before I could heal the physical, I had to heal the spiritual aspects of me that were still wounded, from my childhood. I had to heal the emotional wounds. I'd been working on them in therapy. But what happened is I started using energy work, and I started really just delving into the spiritual world and looking for greater healing. My father died around that time too. I started communicating with him very clearly in the afterlife. And there's a funny little story. A medium was connecting with my dad, and then suddenly I saw my dad going, "You don't need the medium, just listen to me." And I was like, "Okay." It's like, "Okay, Dad, I got it. I can hear you. You're my dad." I was like, so I think it is easier for people to connect with their own family members. We know their symbols. Mediums a lot of times are pulling in the symbols and signs that are really evident to you as that person's child, or as that person who is loved by the person on the other side. But I asked him, the difference between the death experience and the near-death experience. And he showed me that he looked in his life review at everything, I guess because you have time, you're in eternity, every little decision he made, how his whole life could have changed differently. And so he was able to see, from this one moment in time, all the ways that he could be different. And his soul really wanted to evolve, and he wanted to do things differently. So he was looking at that. And I don't know what your beliefs are around this, but it seemed to me that he wanted to come back as in reincarnated, and that kind of shocked me. I was like, really? Like that's kind of odd, but that was what he told me he wanted to do in that place, and he wanted to give it another shot and to live differently. And that he never really apologized for anything, for his neglect or anything, but he just seemed to say, "I'm going to keep sending you love from that other side," that the perfection of that love that he felt there with God, he was going to keep sending to me and keep being with me. And I have felt the presence of my grandfather and dad. Believe it or not, my grandfather orchestrated Dr. Oz from the other side. So he was like, he connected this, and he's like, it was on my birthday when we filmed it in January. And he as I told you before, he gave me $100 before he died on my birthday. And so he wanted to give me a birthday gift, and that was something he did. So I feel him, my grandfather and father both connect with me, and they have protected me at times from the other side. So I always tell people that these connections with ancestors can be actually protective. When I was younger, my grandfather guided me. I was married, and he was not a great guy in my late 20s, early 30s, and I needed to leave him. And my grandfather told me to get in my car and to go down this country road. And I never had been down this country road. I got in my car, followed his directions, ended up at a jewelry store, and I had my wedding ring. And I went in, I said, "You wouldn't happen to buy any older wedding rings, would you?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm polishing them up. I'm selling them online." And he gave me way more money than I would have gotten at a pawn shop. It was enough to get a U-Haul, to leave that husband to be gone. And my grandfather told me to call my father and to get on the phone with him. So my father stayed on the phone and was kind of threatening and rough, he wasn't dead at that time, with my husband. And I was able to leave and be safe and be protected. But I thought, wow, that's almost a verifiable fact from the afterlife that, this connection is real. This connection with ancestors not only can help us in certain ways, but can actually protect us. They want us to be loved and to be healthy and to be well. And they want the best for us, just as they would, like a pure parent's love in this life. That's like a pure life, a pure love over there that's still being given, and it's just love. And I have to tell you that this connection has continued to grow, and it's continued to be just a really beautiful experience. In fact, just this past week, I went and I had lunch, and I was told to do this by my grandmother, and my grandmother and grandfather, Jesus and my dad, all had lunch with me at Luby's. And I haven't been in Luby's in 10 years since my father's funeral. And yet I sat there, and they just gave me love, and they tried to prepare me for the next steps of life, and really having this book out there, because I wrote a lot of personal stuff in this book, and it's kind of scary to put that out there, because I know that near-death experiencers get attacked. I know that, my book is unusual. I wanted to reach the agnostics of the world. I wanted to reach kind of the same people who might pick up any memoir, like, Eat, Pray, Love, or something like that. Just something out there that's a little more worldly, but I wanted it to have a spiritual message that got into their consciousness. So maybe people who are very spiritual might not think the book is spiritual enough, and maybe people who are not spiritual at all, like one guy in my graduate school class, he eviscerated me because I put a picture of the book up, and that he was like, angels in the OR? How could someone who went to this graduate school write about angels? How freaking ridiculous, like who can ever, take that seriously? And all these women, we're like, I take angels seriously. I do too. But he's an atheist, and I said, that's all right, man. I get attacked all the time. I'm totally used to it. I understand. I was agnostic before, but I now talk with people that are, international bestsellers. I've talked with Eben Alexander, Dr. Raymond Moody. I'm connected to all these people, and this is something that people are beginning to take seriously, and it's worth looking into. Read some things by Melvin Morse and Eben Alexander. Read some things that are out there, and then come back to me, and have your opinion, and that's perfectly fine. But, a lot of times atheists don't take the time to read all the literature that's out there. Maybe there's not, I've heard this said before, and it's interesting, maybe there's not enough for science to nail down and say this is absolutely certain, but we could still win in a court of law. Just bring all these near-death experiencers in, and moment after moment, people are like, all right, whatever, yes, you really do have that connection. And I think more than that, people can feel it. They can feel that love of God. They can sense it. They know that when your intention is good, it's good. And my students over these years have largely accepted me because they know I'm there to work for the benefit of their good. And why are you not going to accept someone who, is there for your good, your highest good? So it doesn't matter if they come from the worst home in the world or the best home in the world, whatever their beliefs are. I'm just there for their success, and I'm there to support them and give them a little more love and connection to God. And that's been the joy. So we just have 20 minutes, so I do want to get questions.
One of the things, I have a question for you. I don't know if you want to go into it in your book, but I know, and I don't definitely want to put you in the spot, but you did put it in the book. You had a horrible trauma when you were in South Korea. You don't have to go into it. You could just gloss over it. But what I wanted to know is your perspective on how, instead of turning that could have been a fear-based life or hatred to others, how you turn that into who you are now. Obviously, I figured God had some part of this, but can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm curious myself, and then we'll ask people within questions.
Yeah, definitely. So I was so far out there, just like pure love, and in the state of pure love consciousness. And I went to teach English in South Korea, And South Korea, and I didn't know this, and I always tell students this now too, if they're traveling overseas, you're not going to be protected by the same laws that, you know, a citizen would be protected by. So Americans and Canadians and Australian women were kind of a target. They could be raped, and no one, you know, there would be no repercussion for it. So I was raped, and there was nothing I could do legally in South Korea to get justice. And it was devastating. You know, I was very much back in my body and traumatized for a few years, and it took a lot of healing. On an energetic level, I saw that it was about power, that my power was taken away, and that maybe the person who did this really resented that Western women have more power, you know, than women in South Korea did. And it was like a hatred. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't a sexual thing. It was a hatred thing to just knock the power out of me. And so I saw that I had to heal myself on this energetic power level. And I had to connect with other women. And I found that people heal quicker. And this is one of my movements, whether you're male or female or whatever trauma you've been through, whether it's just grief or loss, if we could all come together and hug one another and be in a safe space and just say, you are fine, people would heal a lot quicker. So I remember looking at this yoga studio and thinking, I wish all the women in there would just come out there and hug me when I got back in the States. Like, that's what I wanted, was just for a lot of safe people to just hug me and tell me I was okay and that I was going to be fine. But the journey was a little bit longer. What I realized in retrospect, and what I realize now after writing this book, I realized in small doses that I was meant to comfort both male students and female students. I had junior high students who fell apart in my classroom, and other teachers didn't even see it. I had one young man who his assaulter, who molested him when he was 7, was getting out of jail that day, and he was an 8th grader in my class, and he was falling apart. And I was like, what's going on? And he told me. And so, you know, I was able to work with him, take him to the counselor, get him some help, you know, talk about legally how far this guy lived away from him and that kind of thing. And then, you know, there were young women who'd been raped and you know, were in abusive households, but I saw that I could always see it. And so for whatever reason, I was there to call CPS to work with these kids to really transform it on that level. And what I realized when I started writing this book is that, oh my God, there are people beginning to talk about South Korea now. And they're beginning to talk about the English teachers who go over there and have experienced this. And we're starting to make the South Korean government look at this. And we're starting, you know, like the more you talk about things, the more you can really enact change on some level. It's a ripple effect, and it starts to change this world and make it a safer, more loving place. And I realized, though I may not do this on some grand level, I'm part of it. You know, I'm part of that spreading of knowledge and part of that change of making society better and more rehabilitated, in a sense that it is love that's going to rehabilitate every single person on the planet. And sometimes that love comes through isolation, though, you know, whether it's juvenile detention and centers and, you know, learning to live differently, or jail and learning to be different. But it still can be loving. And I think those systems need to be more loving and more focused on rehabilitation. But, you know, I look at this in this grand scale of things. There's injustice in so many different ways. In fact, I do want to take questions, but really quickly, there's a man in Fort Worth who was, they picked the wrong person for a rape charge, and he had a heart condition in jail, and he didn't get attention that he needs, and so now he's terminal. So they found the wrong person, you know, and now he's going to die, and the woman who was raped doesn't get justice. He doesn't get justice. The family doesn't get justice. I was like, we've got to do better, you know, in the way that we handle these things. And that's part of it. I think part of activism is just talking about things and making people aware, but it's also about truly spreading love through societies. And that doesn't get talked about enough, you know, that, you know, there are things that the South Korean society does that's beautiful. They're very communal. There are things that are very horrible, you know, the way they treat women, horrible. So there's a lot to think about in societies and in our own society and other societies, and really just to look at healing. And so part of my book was about how to spread healing and through the world. And I know that's kind of a tough topic, but I mean, it had to be personal because it's a memoir, but I really wanted it to apply to anyone's life, because we all go through things that just bring us to our knees, whether it's financial ruin, whether it's, whatever it might be, we've all been brought to our knees.
Thank you for sharing that, because basically by you being a human, it allows us to not be hidden and be human too, right? Because we've all had stuff that we're hiding. You know what I mean? Like whether it's childhood or whatever, something, whatever, So we have 15 minutes. Okay. Yeah, so we've got plenty of time. So thank you for sharing for that. Let's go around and have any questions. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna pass around for questions, okay?
Okay.
All right, hold on, let me get around.
I just have two more questions. One is, where can folks buy your book? The second is, what's in your immediate future? What are your plans and what's going on with you?
Okay, and it is a little hard to hear. I think you said, where can I get the book? And Amazon, you can go look. It's coming out Tuesday, so it's really kind of scary, that stalker that I mentioned, and all these people, they're out there still. So I wrote about real situations, but you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Audible. A lovely lady actually read it, so if you prefer books through Audible, you can get it. Ebook is pretty cheap. But really, if you get the paperback, one thing that's important to me is I'd love for you to donate it to a rape crisis center, a jail, a spiritual center, a church, and a juvenile detention center, anywhere. I think it's kind of I want people who are hurting to find the book, and that's something that's important. And then my plans in the future, is that what you asked? Yeah.
We've taken you from way back to not so far back, and then today.
Yes. Okay. So I got faculty leave, and I have a project where I'm going to work on healing for college students. So I want to create a booklet and a class and maybe a full book for people who are entering college, how to get to success quicker, how to let go of pain in their past, and how to be more aware of all these healing modalities that are out there, because a lot of college students don't know about Reiki or, EMDR, even for PTSD, if they've been in the military and, they have that PTSD. A lot of them just don't even know about all the healing modalities that are out there. So I want a section on healing, but also just on happiness and joy and how to add more life to their life. So I'm going to travel around with faculty leave. I'm off from May to December. I'm going to go around to different colleges, interview people who are doing good things, get quotes from people who are really movers and shakers, and start a new YouTube channel where I'm interviewing students and faculty and administrators, and really just look at who's doing the best work out there with that population. Since I teach in colleges, I thought that would be, one way to spread love and healing through those populations. But thanks for asking that.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for being here, doing what you do, and, having the courage to just step out. You knew you were supposed to do this, to teach and help people, but it takes a lot of courage sometimes with people, not being so nice and against you sometimes, if you're different, you're loving. And I guess I wanted to say that I think you were keying on me with the throat chakra.
I think so.
the blue ray, but, I kind of struggled with figuring out how to be out here. I thought that I needed to do some big thing and get back in and out here. But I think it's the little things you do every day with people, the kindness or helping people or doing this or that. So I just kind of come to that if I need to do something, I'll know it, and I'll just step out further.
Beautiful. So many near-death experiencers have seen those kind moments as really big moments that, someone can be suicidal and you happen to just hand them, some extra cash, or you just help them buy groceries, and, their whole life changes because they're like, wow, someone was nice to me. I mean, those little moments can be that powerful.
Just say one little word or something, and you don't think much about it, but it can mean everything to them.
Yeah, truly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your message and sharing your story with us. It's powerful and continue.
Thank you.
It's magical. It truly is. And I
Oh.
want some time to connect with you about going back. And my gift after my near-death experience as a GPI, I came back as a dowser for healing. And one thing that's been given to me because I get messages all the time is to help folks go back into the moment before the trauma and take them back so that trauma space is clear.
Wow.
So that's been shown to me now. So maybe we can talk about that sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Find me on my website. I have a contact page and connect with me. I'd love that. Amazing.
Also works with the angels. She's done stuff for me. She's my backup.
Wow. Awesome. So yeah, I'd love to connect with you. Very, very cool.
Thank you.
I should have worked on their throat chakras. No.
How big is the metaphysical group in, are you in Austin or are you in Fort Worth?
I'm in Fort Worth and we have DFW. We have a group and it's a tiny bit bigger than yours, but not that much bigger, believe it or not. We get a small group and we go to IHOP afterwards and have some fun and chat about all kind of crazy stuff and have tea. But Dr. Jan Holden is the one who runs it there, and she works at UNT, and we've been kind of lucky because she's gotten some media for some of us, and she's really, she's been an interesting support.
Okay, yeah, I'll sort of leave all this. I've not actually had any near-death experience. Well, when I was younger, I had this sort of off the operating table kind of thing at the beginning of anesthesia. But I've been contemplative prayer, I guess you could say, for the last, since 1991. And I've had these, which I had today with the exercise that we did, that sort of oceanic experience of that oneness and that peace and that light. But I was listening to Mark speaking at the last meeting, and he kind of puts it into these stages that you have. And I've certainly had what seems to be described as that more experience, but I can't. I've sort of begun to go back into my childhood a little bit to see if maybe some of that may be happening then. Maybe I just wondered how you saw that.
Yeah, so there's an interview that I just did, and I think you might be interested in it. There's a technique where this guy, it's kind of like EMDR, but it's called brain spotting, but they call it spiritual activation, where they take you back to a spiritual moment, and you move your eyes in certain ways, and then wherever it's most profound, you go back into it, and you can relive that spiritual experience that you had as a kid and see if there's more to it or there's more. But I felt like when I was talking, I felt like you understood, like on an experiential level, what I've experienced. So just my intuition is that you definitely have, gone to those places and maybe did in that surgery. And that was my guess, believe it or not, that I was like, oh, because I just kind of got that when you were nodding. I was like, oh, he understands. He's been there.
I have more sort of a philosophical question. I'm curious, at what point through your experience or in your experience did you feel like you lost your sense of ego? Like when you're coming out of the body, did you still feel that you were an eye of who you were? Did you not lose a sense of ego until you approached God and had that oneness feeling with God? Like, was there a point through the experience where you felt like you were no longer you were just everything? At what point did that occur?
I really like that question, and just so that I make sure I heard it exactly correctly, I felt like me as soon as I left the body, individualized, still me, and then did I lose some of that as I neared God and started learning more and experiencing more of God? So it's confusing, like how do you explain eternity? How do you explain these concepts in the language that we have? The best that I can do is I can say I was more than me, but I was also still clearly me. And so as I was nearing God, I was being fed, just all kind of love and change and energy and beauty. And I felt my soul just expand for a minute, in that presence of God, as if I wanted to merge with God, but I still felt like me. I just felt like me being shoved in with a lot more information than I could ever bring back. and that was what that felt like. So I never completely lost my identity. I know there's some writers who have talked about that idea, and who am I thinking of? Annie Kagan, she channeled her brother and the afterlife of Billy Fingers, and she said that he wanted to just become one with everything. He wanted to become one with the cosmos, God, and I don't know if that's a choice that people have to just merge into God and be one with God at some point, but I still definitely, maybe because I had to come back here, I felt like I was still me, even in that light of God, but me kind of expanded in a way. So that was, if that answers your question.
Yeah, so you would say that you had sort of an incremental loss of ego as you progressed through your experience? That's accurate?
Yeah, and it's hard to hear for some reason, but I'm saying,
would it be correct to say that you had an incremental loss of ego the further you progressed through your experience?
Yes. So on one level, I was done with the body. So the ego was kind of done, as soon as I saw the body, it was just like, who cares? And then that oneness that I experienced with other people was the beginning of a lot of loss of ego. I just interviewed Dr. Raymond Moody for this near-death experience summit that I'm going to have in June. If you're interested in those types of things, it's an online summit, but he said, as a psychiatrist, and he worked with mentally ill patients, he said that he thinks personality disorders can go away. So if you, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, if you have a near-death experience and you experience that oneness, because then you see your effect on other people and you see that, oh my God, I can't do that. That harms other people. So he said that could be a cure, believe it or not, for some types of mental illness, not the type of mental illness where you're chemically, like bipolar or mania, that kind of thing, but personality disorders that the ego breaks so completely in those moments when you merge with other people in that oneness that you're just not able to not see from other people's perspectives.
Similar to what they say about entheogens. When people take drugs, hallucinogenic drugs that have an entheogenic experience, like God-like experience merging with Godhead, it also can change people's.
Yeah. So the brain spotting and spiritual activation, I do like to tell people about, because you don't need drugs for it, and it's pretty safe and it's just eye movement. But I know that a lot of people do use ayahuasca and other types of drugs to open their consciousness. It's silly, but I know a woman who's dating and she's not sure about this guy because he's done it too much. So I think, maybe you don't want to do it too much, and if there are healthier ways to do it through meditation and prayer, by all means do that.
There's multiple keys to unlock the same door.
What's that?
There's multiple keys to unlock the same door.
Yes, exactly.
I just want to thank you again for doing this presentation for us. It's been a great.
Well, thank you.
It's good.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hello, that was my
Hey.
God brought us together. I really do appreciate your story so much. I didn't have a near-death experience, but I had a major transformational experience when I was young. I had quite a very similar experience to what you did, becoming one with God. I still identify with the I and so much more. So, but I do have one question, And my problem is just the opposite because actually I was raised in United Methodist, and I have 3 older sisters who have become more conservative over the years rather than recent. They're always, I've always, my entire family, their argument to me is that I'm being deceived about the devil because why would God ever send an angel to me? So how do you handle that kind of question when people are saying you shouldn't be living by the Bible and it's only by living through the blood of Jesus Christ that you are saved?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that, and how do you handle that?
Oh goodness, yes. And I, again, the questions are so good. I want to make sure that I hear everything correctly. I think at the end you're asking, how do I handle the people who are saying, some things may not correlate exactly with the Bible, reincarnation or mediumship or these kinds of things, and you should live only by the blood of Christ and the word of Christ. I just interviewed John Burke, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he wrote Imagine Heaven, and he connects the Bible to all of these experiences, and he'll use like the light of God, and it's mentioned so many times. Jesus was the light of the world. The light of God was this. These near-death experiences are so experiential that how can you pick up a book and read a line and it just doesn't compare to seeing an angel or feeling God? So you have to use your imagination, even when you're reading the Bible, to begin to experience what these spiritual experiences are like, and kind of open your mind to, well, those of us who've died or had spiritual experiences, they feel different on that other side, and we may not be able to translate them in words that make sense, biblically sometimes, but they're not to be feared. They really are beautiful, that your soul knows the difference between, your soul knows God. So, there's no way I could have mistaken. So a lot of people say, oh, you were deceived by that angel of light, that was just Satan. I'm like, no, you really know God when you meet God. Like there's no messing that up. God. And so, I have to tell people, what, I knew God, and God had so much infinite mercy and love for me. He has that for you too. So, I didn't meet Jesus until 2008, really about 10 years ago. I was open to Christianity, but it just wasn't on my radar real big. It was just like, okay, angels, God, love, peace. I wasn't, that open to it because of my childhood. And then in that moment when I met Jesus, that healing began to happen. So I would say God is infinitely loving and supporting us all in our individual ways, and we're going to open up in different ways. If someone in jail just gets a little tiny bit of opening and it takes that person 30 years to open all the way, God's still with them. We still have that option, even, on our deathbeds, to call out for him. So he never gives up on us. We're so loved. And that's part of the Bible too, is that we are loved and it's never too late. I hope that answers your question.
And Susan also, she's spoken to our group before, and when she speaks, she had sunbeams coming out, little God sunbeams.
Oh,
It's like when she's so shy, and okay, so I'm just gonna say, Nina over here, who's very powerful but quiet, so is this one, and her husband's such a big fan of hers, he'll do whatever, he's so supportive of it. She really has beautiful, you hear people with their near-death experiences speak, and some are more animated than others, and some actually, like yourself, they actually engage the room, that you feel change, not just mentally, but your heart. And this is what she does. So I would love to see, as you're speaking, I'm getting so charged up seeing the people in here and the programs. I'm getting all these visions. So I just thank you for the blessings. Because I'm looking, when you said your book about putting it in ministries and putting it in maybe better women's shelters, or putting it in, that's a fabulous idea. It encourages me to finish this part of my book, and I'm not real comfortable with it. Thank you. But yeah, don't you see a lot of stuff coming out of this? Don't you have ideas? Don't you have ideas for what each one of us can do, just a little something? And I know some people are pondering, I don't know, but I like what she's saying, but I don't know yet. But but it could be just being someone else, or maybe it hasn't been shown to you. But the thing is, it's always that simple little thing, that little simple next step. So, Tricia, I think I'm going to elect you as being on our board of directors. So they're going to say, how did that happen? And you're like, yeah, so I did it because everybody just really likes me so much. So we're electing you on the board of directors. We don't have a board of directors, but we've now started one. So
I love it.
you know, in the room, so tag you in it. Look, you've shared so much of yourself, and I apologize for the technical issues that we had, in the beginning. Now, we didn't talk about your website. It's triciabarker.com.
Or it's Tricia Barker NDE, so near death experience NDE.
Tricia Barker NDE.com. And one of the things, and we haven't really, you've been busy trying to promote your book and all that, and I was away touring. But one of the things that I would like to see, and we can chat more about it later, but to be able to have some kind of, all online, all that's good, but to have some kind of conference, especially in the Southeast. I would actually gotten the name from my attorney to have a conference. And so I wanted to start that. So I thought we could start locally, work with different various non-denominational churches and different groups. And I think you are just a natural to be a part of that. Do you like Tricia? What do you think? She's fantastic, isn't she? I love your heart. So, does everybody have any other questions? Are we good for now? I feel like I've taken so much of Tricia's time.
Oh, no, it's been a great fun.